Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Würzburg. My name is Louis, and today I'll be your guide through one of the most beautiful Baroque palaces in Europe. Over the next little while, we're going to walk through more than 300 years of history together, so if you've got your headsets adjusted and you can hear me nice and clearly, let's get started. Now, we're standing in the city of Würzburg, one of the most famous cities in the German state of Bavaria. Bavaria, for those keeping track, is one of Germany's 16 federal states. Think of it a bit like one of your own states or provinces back home. And Würzburg itself has an incredibly long history. We're talking over 1,300 years of recorded history here, going all the way back to the city's first written mention in the year 704. So whenever I bring a new group to Würzburg, I like to tell them the city is famous for three things. The first is wine. Franconian wine has been produced right here for over 1,200 years, which makes this one of Germany's oldest wine regions. And if you ever see a wine bottle here with a strange flat rounded shape, that's not a mistake. That's called a Boxbeutel, and it's completely unique to this region. The second thing Würzburg is famous for is its universities. This city is home to 3 world-famous universities, and around 30,000 students study here every single year. So don't be surprised if the city feels young, lively, and a little international. That's the students. And the third thing, the reason we're all standing here today, is the building right in front of us, the Würzburg Residence. It was built to show off the culture and the wealth of Würzburg, and it's considered one of Europe's greatest Baroque palaces. It's been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1981. But here's the thing, to really understand why this palace was built in the first place, we actually have to travel back about 300 years. So let's do that. When this palace was built, Germany didn't exist yet. Not as one country anyway. Germany wasn't unified until 1871. Instead, back then, Würzburg belonged to something called the Holy Roman Empire. Now, what was the Holy Roman Empire? Essentially, it was an empire that stretched across much of Central Europe, made up of hundreds of smaller territories. Some of those territories were ruled by kings, some by dukes, and some, like Würzburg, were ruled by prince-bishops. And I always get the same question at this point, what on earth is a prince-bishop? It's really one man wearing 2 hats. As the bishop, he led the Catholic Church here. He oversaw the diocese, appointed clergy, and cared for the spiritual life of the people. But as the prince, he also collected taxes, enforced the laws, built roads and churches and palaces, and maintained military forces through his territory's obligations. You can almost think of him like a president or a governor of his little territory inside the Holy Roman Empire. The only real difference is, he didn't serve a 4-year term. He usually stayed in office until the day he died, and only then would a new prince-bishop be elected. So why build a palace like this one? Well, for centuries, the prince-bishops didn't even live here. They lived across the river, up at Marienburg Fortress. And that makes sense, because during the Middle Ages, power was shown through strong armies, strong fortresses, and knights. The whole goal back then was survival. But then Europe changed. After the Middle Ages came the Renaissance, a word that literally means rebirth. And suddenly people became much more interested in art, music, education, and architecture. As Europe moved into what we now call the Baroque period, rulers didn't want to impress their visitors with military strength alone anymore. They wanted to show off wealth, culture, music, architecture, and prestige. And that's exactly what led one particular prince-bishop to decide he was going to build one of the grandest Baroque residences anywhere in Europe. His name was Johann Philipp Franz von Schönborn, and he came from the powerful and influential Schönborn family, one of the most important noble families in the entire Holy Roman Empire. Over several generations, members of that family served as prince-bishops, archbishops, electors, statesmen, and great patrons of Baroque art and architecture. In 1719, Johann Philipp Franz was elected Prince-Bishop of Würzburg, and he was determined, right from the start, to make Würzburg one of the greatest courts in all of Europe. So almost immediately, he commissioned the construction of this very palace. On the 22nd of May, 1720, he personally laid the foundation stone, officially beginning what would become one of Europe's greatest Baroque palaces. Sadly, though, he never got to see his vision completed. On the 18th of August, 1724, after returning from a hunting trip, he suddenly became ill and died at just 51 years old. Now, at the time, some people actually suspected he'd been poisoned, but today historians generally believe he died of natural causes. After his death, his younger brother, Prince Bishop Friedrich Karl von Schönborn, picked up the project and carried it forward. Construction had begun in 1720. By 1744, the main structure was largely completed, and it wasn't until 1780 that the interior decoration was finally fully finished. So everything you're about to see over the course of this tour began with one man's vision, a vision of building one of the most magnificent palaces Europe had ever seen. Now, once the residence was finally completed in 1780, the Prince Bishops only actually got to enjoy their magnificent new palace for about 23 years. In 1803, the Holy Roman Empire was secularized. The Prince Bishops lost their political power. They remained bishops spiritually, but they no longer ruled the territory, and the residence was no longer their home. Then in 1806, Napoleon came through and created the Grand Duchy of Würzburg, handing it over to Ferdinand III, the former Grand Duke of Tuscany. Ferdinand used the residence as his own royal palace, and Napoleon himself reportedly looked at this place and called it the largest parsonage in Europe, which, honestly, might be one of history's great backhanded compliments. After Napoleon's defeat in 1814, Würzburg officially became part of the Kingdom of Bavaria, and the residence became one of the Bavarian royal residences, used mostly for ceremonial visits and temporary stays, since the Bavarian kings actually lived primarily at the Munich residence, Nymphenburg Palace, and Schleißheim Palace. Then, in 1918, Germany lost the First World War. King Ludwig III abdicated, and the Kingdom of Bavaria came to an end. Bavaria became the Free State of Bavaria, which, believe it or not, it still is today. The residence became state property, and in 1921, parts of it opened to the public as a museum, so that visitors like us could finally come in and explore it. Now, I do need to tell you about one very difficult day in this building's history. On the 16th of March, 1945, Würzburg was heavily bombed during the Second World War. Around 90% of the entire city was destroyed. The residence suffered severe damage. Most of its roof burned, and many of its rooms were destroyed along with it. But, and this is remarkable, the vault above the magnificent grand staircase survived. And because it survived, it protected one of the greatest treasures inside this building, which you're about to see for yourselves. So that brings us to today. On this tour, we'll be exploring the central wing of the Würzburg residence. Along the way, you're going to see that magnificent grand staircase, whose vaulted ceiling survived the bombing I just told you about. You'll see the largest fresco in the world, painted on an unsupported ceiling, created by the great Giovanni Battista Tiepolo. We'll step into the breathtaking White Hall, one of the finest examples of Rococo architecture anywhere in Europe. And we'll finish inside the magnificent Imperial Hall, where we'll talk about Emperor Frederick Barbarossa and the Prince Bishops of Würzburg. So, if everyone's ready, let's step inside and experience one of Europe's greatest Baroque palaces. Now, remember when I said earlier that we'd have to travel back about 300 years? Well, we've made it. The year is now 1785. Go ahead and use your imagination with me for just a moment. Imagine we've just completed a 2-day journey by horse-drawn carriage, traveling nearly 200 kilometers to reach the Prince Bishopric of Würzburg. We've been invited by Prince Bishop Franz Ludwig von Erthal to attend a grand reception in our honor, right here at the Würzburg residence. As we approach, the enormous size of the palace begins to appear in the distance, and with every kilometer, it becomes more and more impressive. This place was designed to make every single visitor feel the power, the wealth, and the prestige of the Prince Bishopric. But before we even step inside the palace, the very first person waiting to greet us is Lady Franconia. Now here's something a little funny. Remember, we're still supposed to be in the year 1785, but the truth is, this fountain wouldn't even be here yet. It actually wasn't built until 1894, more than 100 years after the residence was completed. It's one of the most recognizable landmarks in the whole city, so we're allowed a little time travel detour. At the top of the fountain stands Lady Franconia. She isn't a real historical person, just like Lady Justice represents justice, or the Statue of Liberty represents freedom. Lady Franconia represents the people, the history, and the identity of Franconia. The fountain itself was built as a gift from the people of Lower Franconia to Prince Regent Luitpold of Bavaria for his 70th birthday. Now, a prince regent is someone who rules a kingdom on behalf of the king when the king himself is unable to rule. In this case, King Otto of Bavaria suffered from severe mental illness, so his uncle, Prince Luitpold, served as the acting ruler of Bavaria from 1886 until his death in 1912. His father was Crown Prince Ludwig, the future King Ludwig I of Bavaria, and a crown prince, just so you know, is simply the person next in line to become king. His mother was Princess Therese of Saxe-Hildburghausen, who later became Queen Therese of Bavaria. And interestingly enough, while the royal family was staying right here at the Würzburg residence, their son Luitpold was actually born inside this very palace in 1821. So rather than putting a statue of Luitpold himself on top of the fountain, the monument instead celebrates Franconia as a whole. It's a reminder that even though Franconia officially became part of Bavaria in 1814, the people here have always stayed proud of their own history, their own traditions, and their own identity. If you look closely, you'll see she's holding a crown, representing the historic importance and dignity of Franconia, along with a flag bearing the Franconian rake, the traditional coat of arms of this region. And she stands facing the residence, almost as if she's personally welcoming every visitor to the heart of Franconia. Now, I usually get one question right about here. Wait, if we're in Bavaria, why is everything called Franconia? And that's a great question. The answer goes back hundreds of years. For centuries, Franconia was its own historic region, with its own rulers, its own traditions, and its own identity. It only became part of the Kingdom of Bavaria in 1814, after Napoleon's defeat. And even today, plenty of Franconians will tell you, yes, they're Bavarian, but they see themselves as Franconian first. That's why you'll notice the Franconian flag, the Franconian coat of arms, Franconian wine, and all sorts of things around the city named after Franconia. Around the base of the fountain, you'll also notice 3 figures, and each one represents a different contribution Franconia has made to history. The first is Walther von der Vogelweide, one of the greatest poets and singers of the Middle Ages and one of the very first famous writers of the German language. The second is Matthias Grunewald, one of Germany's greatest Renaissance painters, best known for his dramatic religious artwork. And the third is Tilman Riemenschneider, one of Germany's most famous sculptors and woodcarvers, and many of his masterpieces can still be seen right here in Würzburg today. Together, these 3 figures celebrate the art, the culture, and the history of Franconia. Alright, let's leave the 1890s behind and travel back once more to the year 1785. We've just taken a little detour to learn about the fountain, so let's pick our story back up. It's 1785. We've just completed our 2-day journey to Würzburg, invited by Prince Bishop Franz Ludwig von Erthal to attend a grand reception in our honor. And standing before us now is one of the largest Baroque palaces in Europe, with more than 300 rooms inside. Now, one quick thing before we go any further. This open courtyard we're standing in, it's not just a parking lot, I promise. This is called the Cour d'honneur, pronounced Cour d'honneur, which means court of honor. During the Baroque period, French was the language spoken in Europe's royal courts, which is why you'll often find French names used throughout palaces like this one, even though much of the actual architecture here was inspired by Italian Baroque design. The Cour d'honneur was designed to create an absolutely unforgettable first impression. This is where kings, princes, bishops, ambassadors, and other distinguished guests would first arrive before ever setting foot inside the residence itself. So let's continue our journey. Our carriage slowly rolls across the Cour d'honneur. Now, unlike today, we don't actually step out here. Our horses keep going straight toward the main entrance. And the entrance looked a little different back in 1785 than it does now. There were large openings built right into the entrance, big enough for horse-drawn carriages to pass directly inside the palace. The architect, Balthasar Neumann, designed the entrance hall to be large enough for an entire carriage to drive inside, turn all the way around, drop off its passengers, and then continue right back out, making room for the next set of arriving guests. Standing before us now are 3 massive entrance portals. These 3 grand entrances were personally insisted upon by the residence's founder, Johann Philipp Franz von Schönborn, and their entire purpose was to create that same unforgettable first impression for every distinguished guest arriving at the palace. Everything about this building was designed to communicate one thing, over and over again: wealth, power, and prestige. And remember, unlike today, we don't step out of our carriage out here. Our horses continue straight through the entrance. The carriage rolls into the vestibule, which Balthasar Neumann designed large enough for an entire horse-drawn carriage to turn completely around inside. The carriage turns, we step out, the horses continue forward and they exit out the opposite side, already making room for the next arriving guests behind us. And with that, our journey to Würzburg is finally over. We've arrived at the Prince Bishop's Palace, so let's step inside and go see one of Europe's greatest Baroque masterpieces.